statistically, you will never be able to putt yourself to success. The stats just don't add up, right? There has to be a level of competency with a wedge in your hand so that you can get it close enough to give yourself a chance to make a putt. Because if you don't get it inside 8 feet, your chances are less than half that you make that putt for a tour player. So imagine what that's like for an amateur golfer out there listening to the podcast.
Golf Smarter number 809. A short opening note about today's episode featuring Brandon Stooksbury on the short game and his Amazon bestseller, The Wedge Book. Brandon lives and works in New Orleans, which was just devastated by Hurricane Ida. We scheduled this interview weeks ago, and at the time of this recording, Brandon is without power, which includes internet and cell service. So being the class act that he is, he drove 30 minutes away just to get enough of a cell signal to record our conversation. I'm telling you this because the first segment of this episode is right after he answered my call, and we discuss what he, his family, and his golf course are going through right now, dealing with the aftermath. We do get into a long conversation about playing better with your wedges and short game, and that's coming up right now. You don't need tour-level talent to hit effective chip shots that provides shorter, makeable putts.
This is Golf Smarter, sharing stories, tips, and insights from great golf minds to help you lower your score and raise your golf IQ. Here's your host, Fred Green.
Hello?
Brandon.
Hey, Fred.
How are you, man?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Are you really? How? I mean, it's God Almighty. Where are you right now?
Back to my truck. You there?
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm fine. I mean, my house is okay. I'm not there at the moment, but it's okay. No damage. Just a lot of cleanup. My staff is okay. Nobody hurt there. The golf course took a little bit of damage that will likely push back our projected November 1st opening date. But considering it was a Category 4 when it blew through New Orleans, I think it fared pretty well. It's just the town there's no power anywhere, no electricity anywhere. And so people are running on generators, but now the gas is running out. And they can't get gas in. And so, considering I think everybody's okay, and it's nothing that New Orleans hasn't been through before, but we're all just spread out all over everywhere. Like I'm in Georgia. I actually, for the storm, I was at a friend's house who has a generator for his entire home.
Phone disconnected.
You there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, so he has a generator his entire home, and so I stayed with him for the storm, and then left town a couple of days ago to come to Georgia, where my family was. They evacuated before the storm, and so everybody's fine, but it's just a mess. And so we're trying to figure out when we get to come home. We've heard that the power in our neighborhood is supposed to be turned back on today. As of yet, it hasn't been turned back on, but that's what we've heard. And so if that's the case, then we'll likely go back home. But I mean, I told my wife, I mean, she wanted to go home a couple of days ago, and, she said, well, we can get a generator. And I said, well, look, here's the problem. First of all, it's 100 degrees outside.
Oh,
we have nothing in the everything in the refrigerator is rotten, right? All our stove and everything at the house is electric. So we can't cook. You can't go out to eat. You can't go to a grocery store to buy anything because they're closed. They don't have power either. And so it's just a mess. It's amazing how dependent our society has become on all that stuff.
Sure.
And you don't know that until you have to go without it.
Right.
And it's not about being able to tough it out. I mean, you can't, we're not set up to live without that stuff.
Right.
So anyway, so it's just a mess. It's a mess.
You obviously had to, how far did you have to drive to just call me?
Yeah, well, that's slowly but surely coming back too. But I had to drive about a half an hour, about 30 miles
Oh
to get
man,
cell phone service.
I so
And so
appreciate you
that's
following up.
slowly but surely coming back. Well, look, I have to be honest. I mean, we scheduled this obviously pretty far in advance,
Yeah,
and I put it on my calendar, but I'm not sitting at my computer, right?
right.
And so I'm not looking ahead, and my phone went off to give me the, like the reminder in my calendar
Mm,
that this was coming up. And I thought, oh God, like I didn't even remember it, because my life, for the last 5 days just hasn't been normal at all. And so I immediately I got in my car and I started driving until I got until I got a signal, and called you. So like I said, everybody's safe. This storm didn't carry near the damage or flooding, to the city that everybody was concerned it was going to bring with it. But it definitely caused some havoc for sure.
oh man, it's and golf is not that important right now when you're going through this stuff. But now, last time we talked, weren't you just in the middle of a move?
Yeah, I was moving to this facility.
Oh,
And so, yeah, so
no.
I started April 1st.
And where's the
And
facility? Where is it?
it's Metairie Country Club. Metairie is a suburb of New Orleans.
Uh-huh.
And so, we are essentially in we're in another city, but I'm 5 minutes from the French Quarter in a car.
Okay.
And so we essentially are, Metro New Orleans. It's a 1922 Seth Rayner design. So it's pretty rare. And we're currently, they closed January 1st for an $11 million renovation to the golf course. And so the entire golf course has been rebuilt. And then we've been working on that project for, 8-9 months. And so we've been closed. And so they brought me in. They hired me actually about Halloween last year, but they didn't want to bring me in until the 1st of April because they were closed.
Right.
And so I've been on property since April 1st, operating without a golf course. And we were, getting ready to gear up. We were supposed to open October 1st, and we had record rainfall this year. We're slated for about 75 to 80 inches of rain a year. And through the end of July, we'd had 72. And so, the rainfall had pushed back some of the construction. And so we had just extended our opening date from October 1st to November 1st. And now most likely, not for sure yet, but most likely this will end up pushing us back a little bit more because we did sustain some damage, not much, but enough to where I think we're going to have to push it back a little.
So the course isn't underwater?
No, it's not.
Thank goodness.
Yeah. So everybody, this was the first major storm to hit the metro area since Katrina 15 years ago. And
right.
Ironically enough, it hit on the exact same day, August 29th.
Right.
15 years to the day. But Katrina was almost twice the size in terms of the storm, and it was moving about half the speed. And so a lot of people don't know the Hurricane Katrina isn't what caused all the flooding. I mean, it is.
It was the levee breaking.
It was the levee breaking, right? Now, obviously, the hurricane caused that, but
sure.
But the flooding was what was unexpected, and
right.
people weren't ready, for the flooding. And then it got so bad that they couldn't get emergency services in when the city did flood. That was the big problem. Well, this is the first major storm since Katrina, so there was some apprehension, right, that this was going to be a repeat of Katrina. I mean, they had made some improvements. They had fixed all the issues, but not all of the issues were fixed or have been fixed 15 years later. And what they could fix was only rated for a Category 3 storm. Don't ask me why they would do that, but that's what the city did. Well, here this thing comes along at a Category 4.
Right.
And so everybody was freaking out, whether they were saying it or not, everybody was concerned. This storm did not bring the flooding with it that everybody thought it was going to. It was pretty fast moving. Now, the coastal areas got hit with some bad flooding, but not the city. And so the city got a lot of rain, And so you got your normal flooding that comes from excess amounts of rain. But that dissipates and drains very well. It doesn't drain, it's pumped out very quickly. And so there really hadn't been any flooding issues, but it hit New Orleans with, 130 plus mile an hour winds. And so it brought down a lot of trees, and, like the entire city grid gets its power from 8 giant transmission lines that cross the Mississippi River from one side of the river to the other on these 200-foot high towers. Well, the hurricane blew one of the towers into the river. So, you don't just buy that at Home Depot. Like that tower has to be built.
No,
it has to be manufactured and built. And so those are the kinds of issues that the city's dealing with right now. Just nobody has power. And they're estimating that it could be up to 3 to 4 weeks before everybody has power.
Oh, man.
So it's just a disaster. And so some people stayed for the storm, and then once they found out their house was okay, they left town. I mean, that's what I did. Some people left town before the storm and have just stayed out of town because there's no point in coming home to a house with no electricity. And then you have a few people that have generators, but again, gas is running out, and there are stations that have gas, but you can't get to them because they don't have power. So they can't turn their pumps on. And so a station will get a generator, and they'll open, and there'll be a line, 3 miles deep, and they will pump that gas station dry of gas, and then the gas station will close. And then the people are just waiting on the next station to open. And so it's getting pretty ugly. They're starting to get, like I said, my town, I live a little outside the city. We're supposed to get it back today. That would be 5 days post storm. And so it's slowly but surely starting to come back. But it's a mess. It's definitely a war zone down there right now. And so it's just going to take some time.
Yep. I'm so sorry you're going through this, man. And it's crazy because here I am in California, and it's on fire here. We've had days where the air was bad, the evacuations that are going on because of the fires. The area that I moved from 9 years ago caught fire this week, and a lot of our friends, they had a whole evacuation there going on, and we're in severe drought. The golf courses, the ones that I play, some of them have reclaimed water, thank goodness, but the ones that don't are just, even the most exclusive country club in our area, the Meadow Club, it's bone dry. And the fairways are brown, and there's no grass at all, and it's just hard dirt. So you're getting too much water, and we're not getting enough. What do we do to fix that?
Funny how it works, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So
are you willing?
Like I said, it could have been a lot worse.
Yeah,
it really
yeah. Well, I'm glad you're safe and the family's safe, and it sounds like they were a little more prepared this time around because there's the casualties are not as high, or not even close to what it was when the levees broke. But yeah.
Well, again, I mean, nobody in the city expected flooding issues,
right?
And so what happened in
all the way up the eastern seaboard, all the way to New York.
It caught everybody off guard.
Right.
A levee breaking was never part of the conversation. It was a tree maybe falls into my living room or something to that effect. And so that's why I think it was like 1,800 people died. People were just in their houses riding out a storm that frankly was smaller than the one that just hit in terms of category. But then the levees break and their house floods and they get stuck in their house.
Yeah.
And you can't get into them. And so they end up dying of heat exhaustion. They end up drowning. They end up dying of, whatever. And so I think this storm killed one person.
Yeah.
Last I heard.
That's what I heard.
And so it could have been substantially worse than it was.
Mm-hmm.
But this thing acted like most people think when you talk about a hurricane. It's a fast moving, high wind storm that brings a ton of rain with it. Right. And you knock down a bunch of trees and you lose power. And that's what hurricanes are. The coastal areas of Louisiana got destroyed. But what you have to understand is those people are used to that. Like, those are very cheaply built. We call them fish camps. They're not really houses, right? They're up on stilts. If it blows away, $15,000 later, you can build it back. It's just not. Those people are ready for that. Like, those people got out of there. They've experienced that before. They know what that's like. You hate for it to happen to anybody, but that's a fact of life down there.
Yeah.
And so this was a hurricane that did exactly what everybody expected it to, and I think that's why you're seeing so little loss of life, thankfully.
Yeah.
And now it's just a matter of having enough hands on deck to be able to bring the utilities back so that normal life can start to come back.
Yeah. I was in a Category 4 Hurricane Odile in Cabo San Lucas in Mexico in 2014. We were right. We got hit directly, the place we were at. And I remember just 30 minutes of calm, like, oh my gosh, the eye is going right over us now.
Yep.
And we were stranded in Mexico for 3 days. Without food and water, and we were airlifted out and flown to Tijuana, and then had to take a bus from Tijuana to Mexico to Tijuana. Took a bus, and then over to San Diego, and then my son came from Los Angeles and picked it up. Anyway,
yeah.
I've been in. It's terrifying, but we were tourists. It's very different than when it's your life. It's your life. Are you willing to talk about golf now?
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right.
Let's do it.
All right. Well, it's really wonderful to say welcome back to the Golf Smarter podcast, Brandon.
Yeah, thanks, Fred. It's an interesting time for sure.
I'm so sorry you're going through this, but let's try to lighten it up a little bit and see if I can distract you for a little while and talk about golf, not golf course, but your book, The Wedge Book, which I've yet to read, but I've been thinking about so much because I've been thinking about the short game a lot and realizing that, because I talked to the Golf Smarter listeners who who struggle breaking 90, 80, even, breaking 100. And, hey, I putt pretty well and I hit the ball in the fairway. Yeah, but how much do you practice your short game? And I'm starting to realize that the short game is the critical element that's going to help you break those scores that you can't. Am I wrong?
No, you're exactly right. I'll share a quick fact. Most people don't know this, but the greens, the average greens in regulation on the tour, right? So in other words, the best golfers walking planet Earth hit an average of about 67% of their greens in regulation. On a par 3, that means the first shot lands on the green, par 4, second shot, par 5, third shot. And so that's the best on the planet. And so when you think about all of us as amateur golfers, like, what's our number? 50%, 40%, 30%, right? And so in other words, more than half the holes we play in any given round of golf, we're going to have to hit a short game shot. And so that's how important that is.
Mm-hmm.
It's a hugely important part of the game that most people don't know anything about. And if you do know something about it, there's a good chance that you've gotten some, I don't want to call it bad information, but you've gotten some conflicting information that's been swirling around the world for a long time. And those are part of the reasons that I decided to write the Wedge Book. It's a really big deal that I wish people would pay a lot more attention to.
Well, there's a huge gap between know something about and do something about.
Right.
Yeah.
And people just don't, people don't know a lot about it. And if they do know a little bit about it, they don't know how to practice it. They don't know what to work on. Sadly, our golf facilities that are out there, if they do have a decent practice area, there's, doesn't guarantee that they have a decent short game practice area. You know that they have a decent greens somewhere around where you can actually hit and practice short game shots. And so there are some inherent challenges that come along with that. But you know, I tried to fight the good fight of making sure that access to information wasn't one of those challenges. And that was kind of why the wedge book and the putter book later, you know, came to be.
Right. And, you know, even I can't remember a practice area that has a putting green where there's signs around the putting green that says no chipping allowed. Right? There's
Right.
no place where you can just like chip up and get these little short ones going, or even a 10-yard shot. There's very few that allow that. And there's really nothing sexy about practicing your short game, right? Because it's where it's going to land all over the map. You know, you go to the driving range, you want to hit the ball far, you want to hit the long targets. You go to the practice putting green, you want to put the ball in or next to the hole. But with chipping and pitching, it's like, yeah, okay, I can do that. It just doesn't exist.
Yeah, it's, you know, people, our industry, right or wrong, and I'm not, you know, calling anybody out, because hitting the ball far is certainly an advantage, right? But somewhere
Clearly.
along the way, our industry figured out that that was sexy enough to be able to attract people and to sell them that idea, if you will. And so whatever wedge there was there, you know, between people getting better and working on the short game just got driven further by this idea that, you know, somehow we're all going to hit it further to our, you know, on our way to success. You know, and again, I go back to the stat that I shared a minute ago. You know, the people on the planet that hit it the farthest still miss the green 70% of the time.
Yep.
So it doesn't matter how far you hit it as an amateur, you're still going to miss a lot of greens, and you're still going to have to hit a lot of short game shots, and you still have to have some level of competency with a wedge in your hand to be able to recognize the advantage that the distance gave you. And so it's important. I would argue to death with anybody that told me that it wasn't. And I you know, I think the stats back that up.
And for years, the way I always interpreted a line that we all know, which is turn 3 shots into 2, I always interpreted that on being a better putter. But I'm realizing now that no. It's being better at your short game so you don't have to make long putts. I had a round last week that I only hit 4 greens in regulation, but on the back 9, I only had 10 putts.
Yep.
Because I was getting my ball close enough to the hole where I can, and I was hitting some 5 and 6 footers that are sometimes elusive, especially, you know, for amateurs. And I didn't even realize I had done that well. And I knew it. I was chipping all day, but I knew that I was chipping well.
Yeah. You know, the stats are even worse in putting than they are in, you know, full swing and greens regulation. So I'll share another stat with you.
Go for it.
From 15 feet, the average tour player makes 26%. Okay. 8 feet is the 50-50 mark.
Yeah, we talked about this last week.
For the best putters on the planet, right? And so, to your point, statistically, you will never be able to putt yourself to success, right? Because the stats just don't add up, right? And so there has to be a level of competency with a wedge in your hand so that you can get it close enough to give yourself a chance to make a putt. Because if you don't get it inside 8 feet, for a tour player, your chances are less than half that you make that putt for a tour player. So imagine what that's like for an amateur golfer out there listening to the podcast. So you've got to have some competency in the short game to get it inside, you know, 5 or 6 feet on a regular basis if you expect to have a chance to make any of those putts to save or to turn 3 shots into 2. Otherwise, you know, it's never going to happen because statistically putting is very, very challenging, way more so than chipping or pitching.
Yep. So, how? How do we get better at that with that? And I guess that's what the wedge book is all about, right?
It is, yeah. One of the first big challenges I saw that drove me to write the wedge book. I'll paint briefly. I'll paint the picture for you. I was in Las Vegas, Nevada. I was working for the PGA Tour Academy, and I was running golf schools on a pretty regular basis. We would see 90 to 100 days worth of golf school a year. And a golf school is a very immersive type experience where someone will fly into town and we are on the tee or on the course or working on golf for 6 to 8 hours a day for 2 to 4 days in a row. And so that's what a golf school is. And so you cover a huge range of topics from full swing all the way down to the shortest putt. And you move through those range of topics very, kind of quickly. And so what I found was that the better I could get someone, well, let me say it different. What I found is that I could get someone's short game a lot better than I could someone's full swing in the format we were teaching in, because the movement is way less complex, right? It's a shorter swing. You don't have to have tour level talent to hit a chip shot, but you do have to have tour level talent to hit a 300-yard drive, right? So I could get people better in short game than I could anywhere else. And so naturally, as a coach, I wanted to be better at the thing that I was getting people better at. And so I started doing some research and started trying to improve my skill at teaching short game. And to be honest with you, Fred, there just wasn't a whole lot out there, especially when you consider how much instruction material is in the world in full swing. And so, at the time I could count on one hand, maybe with a little bit of bleed over to the second hand, the number of books that were really floating in the world specific to wedges. There just weren't many out there. And so I thought, okay, well, maybe, here's an opportunity. And so I started sort of putting together my ideas and trying to solve some myths that I always heard on the tee, and some I call them old wives' tales in the wedge book, some things that are handed down from generation to generation by folks that don't really know a whole lot about teaching short game, but the students in front of them and they're asking, and so they feel like they have to give some information, so they just give you what their coach gave them 50 years ago when they were a kid. And it just gets handed down, time after time again. And it's just, it was problematic. It wasn't complete. It was making it more complex. And so I thought, okay, I've had enough. I'm just going to write my own book, and I'm going to share my own experiences and the information and the knowledge, that I had garnered and that I had gathered over the years. And so the wedge book came to be.
Awesome. Let's take a time out and we'll break down what wedges are necessary, which aren't, and how many we should be carrying. Lots to talk about, and we'll do that right after this. Let's talk about the number of wedges that people have in their bag and why they have as many or as little as they do.
Yeah, that's a great question. And so it's really interesting when you talk about this, because this is one of the areas where what happens on tour is very different from what should happen, in my opinion, at the club golfer level or the amateur golfer ranks. And so on tour, where their conditions are very, very consistent from week to week to week, that the players know what they're getting. Their wedges are always perfect and their wedges are always new, and the skill level is exceptionally high. Those players tend to use fewer wedges. And here's why they do that, because they find it easier to take one club and learn how to predict what the ball's going to do off that one wedge, and then manipulate their technique to create different shots with that wedge. Okay, now that sounds great. That sounds easy. That sounds simple. But these are the most talented people in the world with a wedge in their hand that we're talking about. Mm-hmm. I don't find that works so well at the amateur golf level. And so here's what I would say to an amateur that asked me, or one of my students that said, how many wedges should I carry? And I would say as many as you can to have enough clubs to hit the other shots. And here's what I mean by that. I can give you a technique. I can teach you a motion to hit a shot. Okay. And if you had 4 wedges, you could use the exact same motion, and I could change the wedge out, and you would have 4 different golf shots, progressively higher or lower in trajectory, and therefore how much the ball runs out when it lands with each wedge that you change. Meaning you could make that exact same motion with a pitching wedge, and the ball comes out low and hits the ground and runs a lot. Then you could make the exact same motion, and I put a gap wedge in your hand, and it flies a little higher and rolls out a little less. And then I do it with a sand wedge. It flies a little higher, rolls out even less. And then I put a lob wedge in your hand. It flies the highest and rolls out the least. And you've done all that without once changing the way you have moved. And what people don't understand is this is exactly what's in play in the rest of our bag, right? And so I kind of have this joke. I trick people, into answering this question. I say to them, when they're trying to give me an argument about using one wedge, I say, okay, well, let's go to the full swing. Let's say you're 140 yards away from the hole on the, the green on the 3rd hole, you would hit what? They say, I don't know, 7 iron or 8 iron. Let's just call it 8 iron. I say, okay, so let's say you go to the next hole and you are 165 yards away from the green. You're just going to hit 8 iron harder, right? Sure. And nobody says, yeah, I'm going to do that. What do they say? Well, no, I'm just going to hit my 7 iron or my 6 iron.
Right.
So, okay. Right. But that's exactly what you just told me you wanted to do with a wedge in your hand. So see, the whole beauty of having multiple irons is so that we can make one golf swing, and the ball does different things based on the tool that's in our hand. This game would be a heck of a lot harder if we just had 1 3-iron and we're expected to hit every shot with an iron with that one club. But people want to take that crazy philosophy that nobody would do, and they want to extrapolate it to their short game. And so I want you carrying multiple wedges, because I look at wedges like tools in a tool belt. And the people that are the best at short game look at the situation that's in front of them, meaning the shot that they're, being asked to hit wherever the ball is around the green. And they ask themselves the question, what shot fits best for this situation? Might be a high shot, might be a low shot, might be a medium shot, whatever it is. And then they hit that shot. What shot gives me the highest odds of successfully getting this ball close? The alternative to that would be having 1 wedge and 1 shot and standing in front of that same situation and asking yourself, how can I change what I do to fit this situation? And between the two of those, one is far more complex and harder to achieve than the other.
Sure.
And so I want people to have multiple wedges so that they have multiple options, meaning multiple shots, without having to manipulate their technique. And what you find is that those people, especially if they ever learn to do it at a high level, when they get to the point where they can add in changing techniques like a tour player can, now they have the best of both worlds. And they have the ability to hit any shot you could possibly want. And so now you get into the elite level short game players that the world has ever seen. People by the name of Luke Donald or Jason Day, or Seve Ballesteros, or, you start getting into those names of those guys that have been known for having elite short games. And that's what separates them from the rest.
And Mickelson's a pure magician, right?
Right. Mickelson carries multiple wedges and he hits multiple shots. Absolutely. Yep. And so, I can't believe I just gave 3 or 4 names of greatest short game players ever and left Mickelson out. But yeah,
neither did I. I had to bring it up. It's like, wait a minute, really? You're going to leave him off the list?
Thank you. But that's a good example of what I'm talking about, right? I mean, Phil Mickelson certainly carries more than 1 wedge. He hits more than 1 wedge around the greens. And so there's this idea floating out there that, hey, the tour only uses one wedge. It must be because it's harder to do that. No, it's not harder to do that, in my opinion. I think it's easier for an amateur golfer to learn multiple shots with multiple clubs because you just have to learn one technique. Right. And if I remember my high school math correctly, right, if you learned 2 techniques and you had 4 wedges, now you got 8 shots.
Oh, so you were good at math.
Yeah, that's pretty. That might be like 4th grade level.
Well, I still had to write it down and figure out what you said.
but but that's how it works, right? And so I
Right.
find that's way better for most golfers to just learn a technique, right? Get good at the one technique, and then we can change the tool to manipulate the shot we get. Will that cover every situation? Of course not, but it will cover more situations than just having one tool.
Well, let's break down what you mean by manipulate the tool.
Well, I just mean change the golf club.
Oh, okay.
Right. And so for, again, I can stand there in one, well, I'll get a little bit deeper into that, right?
Yeah.
I have sort of 2 ways to change loft on a golf club without having to really change my technique.
Okay. And that's what we're talking about, is changing the loft of the club,
Right.
depending on what you want the ball to, how do you want the ball to react.
So there are 3 ways to change loft, right? One of the 3 is change the golf club. Okay. But we're taking that one off the table because we're just talking about holding one golf club.
Okay.
You have 2 ways of manipulating loft. You can change the amount of lean the shaft has at the moment of the strike. Meaning if the shaft is leaning more forward or toward the target, you lower loft. If it's more neutral to the ground, meaning perpendicular to the ground, not leaning forward, then you add more loft to the golf club. And so you can manipulate that with moving the ball in your stance a little bit. If the ball goes forward in your stance and you use the exact same technique, you deliver less forward-leaning shaft and therefore more loft.
Do that one again. Wait a minute. Break that one. Do that one again, because I'm trying to visualize it while you're saying it, and I want to make sure I got it right.
So just imagine the ball being in the middle of your stance, and you put the club behind it, and you hold the club normally. Okay, you're going to have a little bit of forward shaft lean because the club sits behind the ball,
right,
and the ball's in the middle. Right. Well, if I move the ball up to the front, just hypothetically, let's say off my left toe for a right-hander, and I put the club down behind it, and I keep my hands right in the middle of my body where they were, the shaft's not leaning forward anymore. It's leaning backward or neutral, right? If I hit a shot like that and return that club exactly the way it was set up to the ball before I started, then I return less forward shaft lean and therefore more loft. That ball will go higher.
Okay.
I take the exact same club and I move the ball to the middle of my stance and put the club behind it, I now have some forward lean to the shaft. And if I just return that shaft to the back of the ball exactly the way I had it set up, then I return more forward leaning shaft and therefore less loft. That ball comes out lower. And so I just manipulated loft without changing my technique because the variable I changed was its setup.
Right. Okay, so now we've gone through different club, changed the lean, and you said you had 3 different ways to change loft, and we're going to do the third one after we take this break. I know that was very manipulative on my part, but we're manipulating the club right now, so let's manipulate the whole team. Let's go ahead. What is number 3?
Yeah, so after changing the club and after changing the lean of the shaft, the third and final way to manipulate loft is to change the club face. And so if I can't really close the face, I can't really get it more than square, but I can open the face of a wedge without having very much of an impact, if any at all, on direction. Let me say that again, because a lot of people ask me this question. When I open the face of a wedge, I add loft. But most people are hesitant to do that because they think if the face is open, it means the ball is going to go more to the right.
Right. That's the first thing comes to my mind.
That's right. And without visually being able to show you, it's going to be a little hard to explain, but because of the amount of loft on the wedge, when you open the face, it has less impact on direction because there's so much loft. And so hang with me here, right?
Yeah,
when I say if think about the direction the energy is directed. Okay? So if the ball's going to come off the club face perpendicular to the face, okay? If that makes sense, right? The ball collides, the club collides with the ball, and the ball bounces off the face where the face is looking, right? Where that energy is. So imagine taking a tee, flipping it over, and taping it to the face of the golf club. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. All right. So if I take a 3-iron, where would that tee be pointed? It'd be pointed way down range, right?
Right. It's going to be, well, if the club face isn't open, we're just on a normal 3-iron.
Right. Yeah, just square on a 3-iron. The club face is going to be pointed pretty low to the ground, down range.
Right. Exactly.
Okay. If I open the face of that, then that tee would point very much to the right.
To the right.
Okay. Now let's do the same thing with a sand wedge or a lob wedge. And then when I put the club down, where's the tee pointed?
Up.
Not down range.
No.
Some down range, but more up.
Yeah.
Well, when I open the face and point it to the right, where's the tee still pointing?
Up.
But
to the right?
No, it's up.
It's still up.
Yeah. And so for your listeners out there, or even you there in your studio, grab a lofted club, right? Put a tee between your two fingers and just flip the tee over to where where the ball normally rests is just laying flat on the face.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Right?
Yep.
Okay. And you'll have to kind of hold it in the playing position.
Yeah, do that.
And then
along
rotate
with me.
the face open.
Yeah. If you're listening, you don't even need a club face to do that. Just take something flat.
Right.
And just
that's right. Yeah.
hold
You
it
can do
up.
it with a book.
Yeah.
Credit card, whatever. Yeah. Whatever's in your hand.
Yeah.
And so it does go to the right a little, but not much.
But how does that impact your grip? Because when I know that in the past, what I would do when I would open it up, all of a sudden my wrists and my hands change because I'm not repositioning my hands on the grip. Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, that's right. So that's because you aren't. You said it. You're not repositioning your hands.
Right.
And so I don't want you to take your normal grip in a square position and then manipulate your hands. I want you to spin the club to point the face wherever you want it to point and then grip it.
Right. Grip it like you normally do.
Yeah. Right.
Right. Okay.
Now, please keep in mind this. I would only ever want you to do this with a wedge, right? Because if you do it with something else, then you have directional problems.
Right.
As we just pointed out. And so manipulating the club face is the third and final way that you can manipulate the loft. Okay. So let's go back to the very beginning. I said, I want you to have one technique and I want you to change the golf club to get a different kind of shot. Well, I can keep that same technique. You can keep using that same technique with 4 wedges. And now with each of those 4 wedges, you can either hit it with the ball forward or the face open. And now I'm getting a little bit above my math grade level here, but the number of options you have is a lot higher than 8 now.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? Right. And I haven't once changed the way I swing it.
Right.
Like, I'm still swinging it the same way. All I had to learn was one technique. And I just gave myself, 30 plus options if I'm carrying 4 wedges.
Right. But here's one thing that I can think of as the amateur golfer, and the guy who's struggling to break a number that they've always been trying to break. And that is fear gets involved, because now you're doing things that you haven't practiced, right? You should be practicing this, but the practice and being relaxed during practice versus being in a game situation where all of a sudden there's a little more tension, a little more anxiety about that shot. There's the fear of sculling the ball or hitting it, like not getting good contact, not hitting the ball, and then the earth. You know what I'm saying? Is like just,
Absolutely.
if I have the club face open like that, it's just going to go yanked off, shankoponymous, right? It's just going to go hard right.
Well, you said it, right? There's a very easy way to solve that problem. Practice it. Right?
So easy.
Like, listen, make no mistake. I would never want you to try a shot like that in a situation that you hadn't experienced before.
Right.
Right. And so if you haven't experienced that shot in the past, then I wouldn't want you to try it in a tournament or in your round. Well, the way to solve that problem is experience it in the past.
Yeah.
Right. Go practice it in an environment where there is no pressure. You have a pile of golf balls laying there, and figure out what happens when the club face opens. And listen, I'm talking about very simple stuff, right? I mean, if I add loft to the shot, if I add loft to the golf club, ball goes more up, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, that means it also flies shorter.
And lands softer, right?
And lands softer. So lots of people, when I'm teaching them this out on the golf course, lots of people hit excellent quality golf shots, but because they have no concept of how high it's going to go, they don't have any concept of how hard to hit it, and the ball ends up short and plugs in the face of a bunker.
Mm-hmm.
Now, relative to our goal of getting it close to the hole, that was not very good. But your execution of the shot was really good. You just haven't experienced it enough to know that when I'm in this particular situation, I have to hit this harder because the ball is going to come off higher than it does when the face is not open. And so, it's funny, as I get older and as I get deeper into my craft as a golf coach, I try to replace the word practice with the word experience, especially when it comes to short game, because short game is all about experiencing what happens when you do X. How does it come off the face? How high does it go? What does it do when it lands? How much spin does it have? How much spin does it not have? How does this lie affect what happens to it? How does that lie affect? Does it come off with more spin or less spin? Do I have to hit it harder or softer? Those aren't technique questions. I'm not saying anything about how you move your right arm or how you shift your weight or how you do that. That has nothing to do with it, right? It has everything to do with experiencing what happens when you do something different. And we don't have to do that in the full swing, right? Because in the full swing, we just make the motion and the ball gets in the way, and then the club does what it's supposed to do to the ball.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it might go right, sometimes it might go left, but we don't solve that problem by experiencing it. But when you're talking about making bigger swings or smaller swings or hitting it harder or hitting it softer, having more loft or less loft, and then willingly and knowingly manipulating those elements, then there has to be an element of experiencing what happens when you do all that together. Otherwise, you can't ever figure it out.
Right.
You've got all these shots, but you don't know when to use them because you don't know when you're going to get them.
And there's one thing that you can't necessarily practice, or should I say, you can't experience, and that is when you're in that type of shot, chances are you're going to either be in thicker grass than you're practicing on, or the lie is going to be very different than just a driving range lie of flat.
Yeah, and so the best place in the world to practice short game is out on the golf course. Now, I realize that's not so easy for everybody, right? Those that belong to a private country club can do that a lot easier than those that play public golf, meaning they pay for their round, because it's not so easy to walk up to a public golf course and say, hey, I'm going to pay for 18 holes, but I'm only going to really play 9, and then on the back 9, I'm just going to practice around. Like, public golf courses don't like that very much, right? And so it's one of the challenges we have in our industry of being able to find, places for our customers to be able to practice short game. There are some inherent challenges there that aren't always easy to overcome. But you can do some things. You can go out and play very late in an afternoon on a day when it's not very busy, right? And you can maybe play a couple of golf balls. Like, you could get away with that at a public club, right? At a public golf course, probably. Now if you go out on a Saturday morning at 9:30 and expect to do that, it's not going to happen. No, right?
You're not going to make many
friends. Just go play golf, right? Yeah. And so I'm not saying it's always easy, but there are times when you can make some adjustments to what you're doing, and you can make it happen. Right. And people just have to be dedicated to doing that.
Dude, I know you're in your truck right now and you've got a lot to get. Can you give me 10 more minutes? I have just a couple more questions.
Sure.
All right.
Be happy to.
All right. Thank you. I appreciate it. We're going to take one last break. We'll be right back. This week on Golf Smarter Mulligans, episode 125 is part 2 with Dr. Joseph Parent, author of Zen Golf, Zen Putting, and his latest at the time, The Art of the Mental Game. This was a for members only episode, which has never been publicly released before. So for most of you, it's the first time to take advantage of an episode that strengthens your mental game. In this episode from 2010, Dr. Joe answers your questions that addresses your mental game and the pace of play.
Routine doesn't mean agonizingly slowly. It means doing essentially, and again, he said strict routine, and that raised a red flag for me. Strict routine becomes rigid and mechanical and slow. What I said was irregular routine. It doesn't have to be exactly the same each time, but the same principles included. If you're making a practice, a feel swing, make 1 or 2 feel swings. Stand behind the ball, take a breath, walk up, look, and go. That doesn't take that long. What I think slows the pace of play down is not being ready and then starting your routine. If you're ready to start your routine as soon as it's your turn, it shouldn't take very long.
That's Dr. Joseph Parent on his book, The Art of the Mental Game, and answering listener questions. Episode 125 of Golf Smarter Mulligans is being released this Friday. Both Golf Smarter and Golf Smarter Mulligans are available from where you're listening to this podcast right now. Please subscribe and follow both so that you can either download or stream the brand new episode on your favorite listening device. Brandon, again, I really appreciate your time and you spending time with us. Both books that you have out by Brandon Stooksbury, the putter book, the wedge book, and we're talking all wedge today. And one of the things that I consistently see, and I even, some playing partners I've been saying, do you mind if I make an observation to you? I'm not trying to give you lessons. I don't do that, but I've talked to enough teachers now that I have some sense of what's going on. And I notice that everybody is trying to get it so the ball just trickles into the hole. And I've been telling a couple of my friends lately, I said, play so you can just hit the stick. Don't worry about the hole. Hit the stick, because there's this fear of going too far and then having to come back down. But everyone's coming up short all the time. And I think that happens a lot on the short game as well, is that if I can just get it on the green, I'll be happy. But no, let's get it to a point where we're going for tap in here, right?
Well, I think that's where that experience comes in, right? Because here's what I would say to that. I think when you're first starting, I think just getting it on the green and getting a putter in your hand is a pretty good goal.
Right.
Right. But what's the difference in just getting it on the green and getting it close? Competency with distance control. That's the difference, right? The same shot that just gets it on the green would get it close to the hole if you were more competent in your ability to adjust the speed at which you were swinging it and knowing how far that ball goes. And so I think there's something to be said for the stage of just get it on the green. But then I think there has to be the next step of growing your skill set so that you have better control over distance control, particularly in the short game. Now, I feel a little bit different about that in terms of putting, which we can talk about whenever you want, later or now or whatever.
No, we'll get you back on. We'll talk putting.
Distance control in short game is a little different than distance control in putting, but I think that comes with a higher competency in your ability to manipulate the size of swing so that you can manipulate how far the ball goes. Being able to blend how much it's going to roll out with where you land it on the green and with what kind of trajectory you hit it with. Like all three of those go together. Right. And the only way to get all that right is to experience it enough to know how to control it. To be able to walk up to a situation and say, I could make a pitching wedge land on the green, or I could make a sand wedge land on the green, but my pitching wedge rolls out X and my sand wedge will roll out Y, and I need it to roll out Z. So how do I blend all that together to get it closer to the hole? And that just comes with a level of experience and a level of competency that you just have to build and grow.
Manipulating the size of the swing is really hard to do without a lot of practice. We keep coming back to that. But someone who's just practicing their swing and trying to make contact and focused on that, when you get into the nuance of manipulating the size of the swing and seeing how the ball reacts to that is something that takes a tremendous amount of time.
Yeah, there's no doubt it's more challenging. And I think that plays into the narrative of why people don't traditionally have a very high level of competency in short game, because it tends to be one of the more challenging aspects of what we do. Because you can't use momentum to help you very much. See, in short game, we can use the swinging momentum of the golf club and it sort of moves on its own. Once you get it started with minimal input from the golfer, it will swing on its own. Well, you can't do that in short game.
Right.
You're hitting it 20 yards. You can't, it's hard to really let the golf club's not going to have enough momentum to swing on its own. So you're going to have to use a little bit more of your hands and arms or body or whatever to make the golf club move. And that's why that gets more challenging. It's definitely harder. There's no doubt about it. And that's why a lot of times you have to learn that specific technique, because the technique is a little bit different in short game than it is in full swing. You know, a lot of folks make the mistake of thinking that the short game shot, that a 20-yard wedge shot is just a miniature version of a 125-yard 9-iron. And it's just not true. Because the golf club isn't swinging as fast, and because the soul of the golf club is built differently than a 7-iron, so to speak, then, we have to do things a little bit different. And so that's where learning that one technique comes into play, and then learning how to manipulate the variables of the club that we've been talking so much about. And between the two of those, you learn short game.
Do you have any rules of release? That's how I wrote it down, rules of release. But I mean, like, to know how far the ball is going to release once it lands, depending on the club or your swing. Are there ways to think about that when you're standing there with the ball and trying to figure out how I get the ball close to the hole?
I think there are generalizations that you can use. I don't like the word rules, because conditions change, right? And how much a wedge rolls after it lands on a hard, fast, dried out green is very, very different than a slow, wet, soft green. And so
Sure, of
I think
course.
there are rules that you can keep in mind. A very basic rule would be that the wedge, the wedge would roll about 2/3 of the amount that it flies. Now I'm talking about inside 30 yards here, right? Outside 30 yards, things tend to get a little bit different because you put a lot of spin on the ball. But if you're going to hit a pitching wedge or a 9-iron, it's probably going to roll. It's going to hit about 5 yards onto the green and roll about 2 to 3 times that, 10 to 15 feet, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
right?
That's good to know.
A sand wedge might be half and half. So it's going to fly, 5 yards onto the green. It might roll 5 yards. Again, this is estimation, right? A lob wedge, might fly 5 yards onto the green and only roll 2 yards. And so I try to stay away from rules because things change, conditions change, that make rules not rules anymore. But I think there's a basic understanding of loft and what that does to roll out on the ball, and then how that applies to changing conditions. And then it comes back to experience.
Sure.
Right? Like you have to do it. You have to be in the situation. You have to hit that shot before, and you have to be able to, this is why people warm up, right? This is why you should hit some short game shots before you go play, because you need to know what the conditions are like that day so that you know how far the lob wedge is going to roll out or the pitching wedge is going to roll out, because if it rained last night, the green is softer and that changes everything.
Right.
So I don't like the word rules,
Okay.
because
That's fair.
things change too much in our game, but there are generalizations you can make, right? And I mean very general. A lob wedge is not going to roll as far when it hits the ground as a sand wedge. A sand wedge isn't going to roll as far as a gap wedge, and so far on down the line, right? And so you kind of have to be able to look at the situation and say, wow, I need a lot more roll on this particular shot. So that requires a lot less lofted golf club. Well, is that an 8-iron? Is that a 9-iron? Is that a pitching wedge? Is that a gap wedge? Well, I don't know. It might be a pitching wedge for me. It might be a 9-iron for you. It might be an 8-iron for Billy. Right? But the point is, it wasn't a lob wedge. Does that make sense?
Oh, yeah. And now I know, for what I just learned, is for future conversations is never to ask for rules, just for generalizations.
Yeah, I just don't like rules. I just, because rules, I mean, look, people have rules,
right.
But I don't like rules, because the conditions are all, everyththing depends on the conditions.
Yeah, the X
and what you get playing in California is different from what you get playing in Louisiana, is different from what you get playing in
Michigan.
New York.
Yeah.
Or wherever.
Right.
And then all those places change with the season. Well, California might not change much with the season, but it just varies so much. You have to be able to adapt, and adaptation requires experience.
Right.
Adaptation, requires experience.
So let's wrap it up with one or two of your favorite short game drills.
Ooh. I love a ladder drill. Okay. And so get yourself a pile of golf balls and get yourself a bunch of alignment sticks. If you don't have alignment sticks, take all the head covers off your woods, or get 3 or 4 towels or something. Pace off. You can do this on flat ground. Pace off 15 paces from your pile of golf balls and put a stick on the ground. Lay it down flat on the ground, like the rung of a ladder, if that makes sense. Take another 5 steps and lay down another stick or head cover or towel or whatever, right? And then another 5 steps and lay down another stick. Okay, so between each stick or shaft, or, well, not shaft, don't lay a shaft down, head cover, towel, whatever, it's about 5 yards. Okay. And so then you come back to your pile of balls, and you look out there, and now you have a line of sticks or towels or, head covers that are each about 5 yards apart. And stand there with one golf club, pick any club you want, and work your way up the ladder. Make the ball land between the two sticks. Doesn't matter where it bounces, right? Just land. And then if you're successful at that one, then move to the next rung on the ladder.
And you're saying to have it
there.
You're saying to have it land, not end.
Land where it lands. Yep.
Not where the ball finishes, because it's going to roll after
green
that.
Conditions change, right?
Right.
And so firm greens, soft greens, freshly mowed greens, late in the afternoon greens. I mean, you just can't, it changes too frequently for you to really be able to predict that stuff. And so if you can figure out, you're essentially working on distance control. Is what you're working on, right? You're learning how to vary the size of your swing to predict how far the ball's going to fly.
And that's what you really should be focusing on, is the size of your swing to make the ball do that.
That's correct. Not the speed of the strike, but the size of the motion.
Excellent.
Because the tempo should stay the same, right? But it might be smaller, it might be larger, depending on how far you need the ball to fly. And so that's probably one of my favorite drills.
Okay, let me ask you this about that drill. Am I alternating with every shot to the different ladder positions, or am I taking 2 or 3 balls with the first position, 2 or 3 with the second?
So that's a great question, because depending on your skill level, it changes, right? And so here's what I would say: when you first start this drill, it's going to be really hard. Okay. So stand there with your pile of balls and hit as many balls as you need to until you get the ball to land in the first rung of the ladder where you want. The minute you're successful, go to the next rung on the ladder and hit as many balls as it takes in order for you to make one land there. When you're successful there, go to the next rung on the ladder. Okay, so that's sort of the baseline variation. Okay, eventually that will get easy. If you practice it and experience it enough, that will get easy. When it gets easy, or I should say when it starts to get a little hard, make it harder. So now you get one ball, right? So you hit it and you make it land in the first rung, and then if you're successful there, hit the next one to the next rung, and if you miss it, go back to the first one and start over. Right?
Yep.
Right? You still got one club in your hand. The next variation would be to change the club. Okay, so you've got a sand wedge, hypothetically, for the first rung, and you get it there. And now it comes time for the second rung, change to a lob wedge.
Right, but don't change the position of your ladders.
Right. The ladders stay on the ground.
Right, they stay where they are, but you're using different clubs, so now you're seeing
that's right.
The size of your swing for each of these clubs.
Correct.
Yeah.
I'm stressing my brain enough to say, okay, now I have a lob wedge. So it's not just as simple as making a little bit bigger of a swing than I made with my last sand wedge. Now I have to make one exponentially, well, not exponentially, but much larger because I have a higher lofted golf club, or much smaller because I have a lower lofted golf club. You're just raising the challenge point as you get better and better and better at it.
Oh, man, and we are going to get better. Brandon, I'm going to stop you here because I know you have things to get back to that are much more important than what we're talking about. But again, I truly appreciate your time. I wish you and your family all the best, and that everyone comes out of this safe and healthy and dry and with power and fresh food. And all your neighbors and everybody in the South, our prayers are with you.
Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. We are a resilient community. We always have been, and I'm proud to be part of now down in South Louisiana, and we'll come back. It'll take us a little while, but we'll survive. We always do. And we appreciate the thoughts and concerns from everybody out there. We need it right now, but I can assure you we're on our way back sooner rather than later.
And finally, give us the best ways to find you online to learn more from you, in addition to buying and reading both the Wedge book and the Putter book.
Yeah, so everything I have out there in the world is under Stooksbury Golf. I joke all the time that one of the, when you have a last name like I have, it makes a dinner reservation a real challenge. But there aren't many of us around. So if you can just figure out how to spell my last name, you can find me online, I can assure you. Everything is under Stooksbury Golf. Web page, YouTube channel, Twitter feed, Facebook, everything out there. My books are sold on Amazon. I do sell them off my website. If somebody wants a signed copy, I'm happy to arrange that. Just reach out to me through one of my contact forms, on my webpage, or my phone numbers on my webpage. People are always welcome to call me there too. And I can arrange to mail you a signed, a personalized copy. And you can just pay me, direct. But otherwise, you can find both books on Amazon. Just search the Wedge Book or the Putter Book, and you'll find it. The Wedge Book was number one on the bestsellers list for over 5 years. It's still in the top 10. And so I don't know why. I can't explain that. All I can say is thank you. And I'm fortunate to, to have had that experience. The Putter Book, last I saw, was also in the top 10. And so type in the Wedge Book or the Putter Book. You should be able to find whatever you need there. And if you have any issues, just look me up online, stooksburygolf.com. And I'm always happy to hear from fans and clients and customers and golf fanatics who want more information. So don't ever hesitate to reach out. And
you can, of course, go to the show notes to find the spelling for Stooksbury Golf, but it's STOOKSBURY, Stooksbury Golf. And let me give you this one, Brandon, as we part. Next time you go to a restaurant, tell them your name is Fred. They get it right.
That's
every time.
That's right. Smith. That's right. Yeah, I'm a pro at that.
Well, I actually like using Hardy, because then they go, Hardy party for 4.
I like that. That's good.
The Hardy party.
I hadn't thought of that.
All right, man. Be well.
Listen, Fred, thanks so much, man. I always have a great time. I look forward to the next opportunity. I appreciate what you do, not only for me, but for our entire industry. So thank you very much.
Oh, man, I really do appreciate him honoring our appointment when he really didn't have to. Isn't it wonderful how resilient we can be? The human spirit is incredible. Thanks so much to you for sticking with me in this week's conversation. I'm sure you didn't come for a news segment, but it was so immediate and so local, I just had to include it. So thank you. Happy New Year. Not all of you will understand what I mean, but if you do, here's to a happy, healthy, and sweet new year. Golf Smarter is your podcast for a caddy, and like caddies, we graciously accept tips for services provided. The tip jar is now open. Just click on donate at golfsmarter.com.